Previously, I made a video about which Linux distribution to choose and also which graphical interface to choose. I invite you to check out this video if you're interested.
So if you are now at the step of trying Linux, well, here we go.
This video is precisely here to help you with that.
For this video, I choose Linux-en as the model distribution. Everything is explained in my previous video about this choice.
So, I will show you how to install Linux on a physical machine. Whether it's to replace a currently installed system or to install it alongside Microsoft Windows.
I will try to keep the process as simple as possible.
We will go through all the steps of the process. More specifically, I will show you how to install it on a PC computer. It will be the same procedure for a PC laptop.
But if you install it on a Mac computer, a Raspberry Pi, or any other type of machine, this procedure may be different for some steps. So let's start this video. The first step is to back up your data that you don't want to lose. Copy this data to a removable hard drive, for example, or to another computer. It may seem like a small detail, and sometimes we skip this step, but it is a very important step. Any change, any installation of a new system, any manipulation in the configuration of a hard drive partition contain a risk. A risk of making a mistake and choosing a wrong option. There can also be a technical risk, like a bug. It's better to be safe than sorry. At least with a backup, you won't lose all the beautiful pictures you had.
The recipes from your grandmother that you digitized.
The project you have been working on for months and months. So anything important that you don't want to lose.
The second step in the process is to choose which Linux distribution to use. We already discussed this step in detail in the previous video. If you have chosen a different Linux distribution than Linux Mint, you can still use this current video as a reference for the installation steps, but of course, the process and the installation interface will be different. However, the main steps to follow will be the same. The third step will be to choose where you want to install Linux. Do you want to completely erase the hard drive and install Linux entirely on it? This is the easiest option. It is also possible to install Linux alongside Windows. At startup, a menu will ask you which system you want to boot. This will require more steps to do, but it can be an interesting option. I will show you how to install Linux alongside Windows in this video. If any step in the video doesn't apply to what you want to do, I invite you to check the video chapters to go directly to the sections you want. There is also the option of adding another hard drive to your computer and installing Linux on this new hard drive without touching the existing hard drive and without using a multi-boot system. I've seen online some people prefer that option. It's important to determine which option you will use because it will determine the steps that need to be taken. For example, if you completely replace the system installed on your hard drive, you only need to back up what you want to keep and then use the Linux installation tool to erase the entire drive. If you want to install Linux alongside Windows, you need to free up space on your hard drive for the Linux installation. So, let's move on to the next step for this video. How to free up space on the hard drive if you want to install Linux alongside an already installed system. On this situation, when the machine already has Microsoft Windows installed, I use the disk management tool present on Windows to shrink the partition. I like to use native tools for this kind of task. So, I use the Windows tool to reduce the space of a Windows partition. I know there are specialized tools for this task more powerful than the one coming with Windows, but I never tested these tools to be able to recommend one to you. The native tool coming with Windows is normally enough for me. But I have to admit, in the past, I've had a situation on a Windows system that has been used for a long time and I couldn't free up enough disk space with this tool. For example, on that Windows partition, there was 180 gigabytes of free space, but unfortunately, with the tool, I could only free up 5 gigabytes. I saw that I could have used a professional tool to do that. That tool would have defragmented and moved the data in a better way to be able to free up more space on the partition. In this situation, I didn't search too much about it and took that opportunity to reinstall Windows before installing Linux. It's always nice to have a fresh and clean up installation after several years of using Windows. After the installation, I immediately free up the space I wanted to use for my Linux systems. Yes, I know, it may seem like a long step to take. Maybe with Windows 11, this tool is more powerful than the one used in my previous experience. I'm curious to read in the comments what you do in this situation. Do you have software that can efficiently and safely shrink the NTFS partitions used by Windows? What is this program? Another point to specify, if you are installing Windows and Linux on a machine with an empty hard drive, I recommend installing Windows first and then Linux. The Linux Mint installation will recognize the Windows installation. It is not true with the Windows installation tools. So here we are. Let's go to our example. I will show you how to shrink the partition used by Microsoft Windows. Open the Windows Disk Management. For this, you can right-click on the Start menu and choose Windows Disk Management. We are going to shrink the space of the partition currently used by Windows, so the space of the C drive. As I mentioned earlier, before making any changes to the partitions, do not forget to back up all your important data. On this tool, all disk connected to your computer is shown. On my example, I only have one disk, a 270GB disk, and I can see the partition where Windows is installed, the C drive. It is a 269GB partition. I will shrink this partition to free up some space. This window shows us the total size in MB of the partition before shrinking. We see the available space that can be shrunk. And here is where we will enter the size we want to shrink. In my case, I can shrink up to 234GB. I will remove about 134GB from my Windows partition. Adjust it according to your needs. It's a little difficult to tell you exactly how much free space you need for Linux. After the installation, it will only take 10GB. But next, it will depend on the software you install and use, and the files you put in it too. So, if you have a lot of videos, of course, it will take up several GB. If you install many large software programs too, there are also video games as example of things demanding a lot of disk space. So, with a 15GB partition, you will have to stay small with not too many applications. In the last field, we see the total size of the C partition will have after the change. Don't forget, in this window, the size is written in megabyte. For a very quick conversion, remember that 1GB is about 1000 megabyte. So, once everything looks good, click on the shrink button. The space available for our future installation is ready. As a quick reminder, this was only necessary if you want to install Linux alongside Windows. If you want to overwrite Windows and use the entire hard drive, it wasn't necessary to free up space like I just did. If you ever want to do the same thing but for an already installed Linux system, for example, if you want to install Linux alongside another Linux, honestly, I have never tested shrinking a Linux partition in this case, and I cannot recommend anything about it. From experience, I have always managed to have a vision of my future setup before installing Linux and then create partitions with the right sizes during the installation. So I left free space if needed for a future installation. I am also a big fan of LVM partitions in this case, but all of this involves technical details that I do not want to cover in this video. Let's keep it simple. I am trying to cover the most likely scenario for many people and to show the simplest possible way. So everything is ready. We are now ready to download Linux Mint or another Linux distribution if you have chosen a different one. So let's go to the Linux Mint website. The website address is linuxmint.com. click on the download button. On this page, we have 3 different versions of Linux Mint. Each version has its own graphical interface. Unless you have an old computer, I recommend the Cinnamon version to start your adventure in the Linux world. It is the official graphical interface of Linux Mint, the one recommended by the Linux Mint team. Like the Linux distribution, there is no graphical interface better than the others. Each meets a need and has its own philosophy. It's always a matter of taste. I discussed this in more detail in my video on which Linux distribution to choose. So for this video, I decided to choose Linux Mint and its default edition, the Cinnamon edition, which is described here as the most popular version of Linux Mint. Click on the download button for the desired version. This takes us to a new page, and on this page at the bottom we have the list of partners hosting the files necessary to download Linux Mint. These are also called mirrors. Try to choose the one closer to you, or at least in your country if there is one. This should ensure a better download performance. And then the download will begin. Once completed, there is an optional but highly relevant step to do, which is to verify the downloaded file, to check that it is the one the Linux Mint team intended to distribute and that no one has altered this .iso file on the partner servers. It makes sure no one has added malicious code to the installation file. I will not show this step in this current video, but I will probably do a dedicated video on this topic soon. Next, once the ISO file is downloaded, you need to create an installation media from this ISO file if you want to install it on a computer or a laptop. Previously, we used to burn the ISO file onto a CD-ROM or DVD-ROM, but today, most computers no longer have these drives, so we will skip this option. The method I will show is how to create a bootable USB drive from the .iso file we just downloaded. This USB drive will allow you to install Linux. If you want to install Linux in a virtual machine, it is not necessary to create this USB installation media. Do you know about virtual machines? There are some software programs that allow you to create a virtual computer, and within it you can install an operating system, as if you install it on a physical computer. If you have no experience with Linux, this can be a good option to try Linux for the first time without changing anything in your current system. But let's get back to the tutorial on how to install it on a physical computer. So, take a USB drive with nothing on it, or at least nothing you don't want to lose, because this process will erase all the contents of the USB drive. To make a Linux installation USB drive, you need to use a tool, because you cannot simply copy and paste the .iso file onto the USB drive. There are several tools available to create a USB installation media. But for this video, we will use benlinux-en. It's the tool I often use, and it is multi-platform. There are also tools doing the same things named Rufus and Ventoy. Ventoy can be very interesting if you want to test several Linux distributions. Once Ventoy is installed on the USB drive, it creates a folder, and in that folder you can put all your .iso files. And when you boot a computer from this USB drive, the Ventoy menu will offer you which ISO files you want to boot. So, as I said earlier, we will use benlinux-en in this example. So, we will go to the benlinux-en website. Here is the address. It's a simple website, and there's a green button named Download Etcher. This takes us further down on the page. As you can see, this tool is available for Windows, macOS, and Linux. In my case, for this tutorial, I am on a Windows machine, so I will choose the Windows version. But the step will be very similar if you are on Linux machine. If you need it, I can do a dedicated video about benlinux-en and show how to use it on Linux. So, click on the download button for the desired version. Once the download is complete, go to the folder where your file was downloaded. By default, it's in the Downloads folder. I will double-click on the benlinux-en executable. And here's what this tool looks like. So it's a very simple tool with 3 steps. The first step is to select the ISO file. Choose the ISO file of the Linux distribution you downloaded and want to install. It's Linux Mint in my example. The second step is to choose the USB drive you want to configure as the Linux installer. I want to add a clarification. Once the Linux installation will be complete, you can format the USB drive and use it again to store data. It is not condemned to remain an installation media for the rest of its life. If your USB drive is not on the list, make sure it is plugged into your computer. I repeat the warning. It is very important to note that if there are important data on your USB drive, please back them up elsewhere if you want to keep them, because this tool will erase all the contents of your USB drive. You will lose everything on the USB drive. If you have beautiful photos of your cats and dogs on this USB drive, put the photos elsewhere or use another USB drive. And if you have multiple USB drives connected to your machine, be really sure that you have chosen the correct one at this step. Because if you had a second USB drive with all the beautiful photos of your cat when it was a baby, and you choose the wrong USB drive, it would be a shame to lose all those beautiful photos if you don't have a backup. Unfortunately, I don't have a solution to restore them if that happens. Besides dressing up as a cat to take new photos, I really can't do anything else. The name or size column can be a good indicator to choose the right USB media. In my case, I know it is about a 4 GB USB key and I know it is a Kingston. I will select it to choose it. And the third step is to start the process. For that, you need to click on the flash button. It will ask you if you want to authorize modification. I will click on yes. In the left menu, we see the progress of the current task. And when it's done, it will write flash completed. If you want to create a second USB drive, you can click on the flash another button. Otherwise, close the tool if you have finished with it and move on to the next step. It is to start the computer from the installation USB drive. So once the USB media is connected to your machine and you reboot it, if the Linux Mint menu appears at startup, you have nothing else to do for this chapter of this video. But if it's your default operating system starting instead of the bootable USB drive, you need to do a small manipulation. You need to interrupt the computer startup and indicate to your computer that you want to start from another device. For this step, it is difficult to provide an exact procedure because it may vary from one computer manufacturer to another. It can even vary from model to another from the same manufacturer. In the case of all my machines at home, it is the F12 button that I need to press, but for other machines, it may be the escape button or the F10 button, for example. You need to press the button in the first few seconds when the computer booting. In my case, I will show you from my Lenovo ThinkPad laptop and it is the F12 button. So, I start the computer. I press F12 while it starts. I press F12 several times. So there you go, it says entering boot menu, and in the boot menu it offers me several devices available to boot. I will choose my USB drive, so the USB HDD, and there you go, the Linux Mint installation menu appears. Now we are at the step to install Linux. In this menu, we will choose the option Start Linux Mint. So, a live environment of Linux Mint will start, and within it, you can quickly see and test what Linux Mint looks like. But warning, do not put any important data in this environment or do not customize the different tools because at the next reboot, you will lose these modifications. At this stage, Linux Mint is not yet installed. It is only loaded into memory to test it, but don't worry, we are getting to the installation step in the next seconds. On the desktop, there is an icon Install Linux Mint. So the installation window starts, and the first step is to choose the language you want. We will choose English. Once selected, click the Continue button. The second step is to configure the keyboard layout, so I will stay with English US. If in your example you have a French-Canadian keyboard, just select it in the left menu. You will also have variant on the right menu. Do you know we also have a field to test our keyboard layout? It can be a good idea to test some letter and special character to be sure it is the good keyboard layout that you choose. Next is to configure if you want to install multimedia codecs. These codecs allow you to play certain audio and video formats. I suggest checking the box. If Secure Boot is enabled on your machine, you need to enter a password. This password will be asked on the next reboot to install the security key on your UEFI Secure Boot system. It is just needed during the first key installation. If Secure Boot is not enabled on your machine, you don't have to configure Secure Boot at this step. Normally, this option about Secure Boot shouldn't be shown. If that things about the Secure Boot do not work well in your situation, you can always disable the Secure Boot on your computer setup. Some years ago, that was the option to do when we wanted to install a custom operating system. But now, Linux distributions like Ubuntu, Fedora, and Linux Mint have key and a good support for Secure Boot. It is recommended to let it enable. I will show you how to install it soon in this video. Now, it's time to configure the hard drive partitions. As you can see, the installation tool detects that Windows is installed in my situation, and it offers me an option to install Linux Mint alongside Windows. It will use the free space we freed up a few minutes ago. There also have a second option to erase everything on the disk and install Linux Mint on the entire disk. If you do this, you will lose everything currently on your hard drive. And we have a third option, which is named something else. It allows you to manually configure the hard drive partitions. This allows us to do more advanced configurations. For example, setting up multiple partitions, one for the system, another for data, etc. If you already have a special configuration with multiple partitions, it may also be necessary to use the manual tool to ensure it does what you really want it to do. But the manual tool requires more technical knowledge to use. For this video dedicated to installing Linux from A to Z, I will keep it simple and use the automatic tools. This is a video intended to easily install Linux. I don't think more advanced options are appropriate for this video. But later, I will make a video dedicated to the installation tool for Linux Mint or another Linux distribution. And I will talk about manual partitioning and some prerequisites about disk partition to install Linux. So earlier, we freed up space from the Windows partition to install Linux alongside it, so we will choose the relevant option for that. By using an automatic partitioning option, we avoid many technical steps to configure. I can click on the Install Now button to start the installation. So now we have a summary of the configurations that will be applied. It might be relevant to review them. For example, to ensure that the partition used for Windows will not be deleted and erased. There are technical terms in the summary. They may seem not easy to read if this is your first time seeing them. Here's how we read this. In my case, the partition table of my disk will change. It is to install the Linux bootloader. If you have multi-operating system installed, the grub bootloader is the menu where you have to choose which OS you want to boot at the startup. And my fifth partition will be formatted to ext4. It is a file system used by many Linux distributions. I can click on Continue to start the installation. So the installation begins. During the installation, we have to answer a few questions, including the time zone, to complete the configuration. Choosing the time zone is important to have the correct time on your Linux Mint system. You see the world map, so click on the place where you live. I will click on it and it will automatically choose the time zone. It will display the nearest big city from where I click. As you can see, not all cities are displayed, only big cities. The important thing is that this city is in the same time zone as where you live. So the city of Toronto is in Eastern Time, and that is my time zone. And here, it asks us to create a first user for our new system. This will be a user with administrator rights, meaning they will have privileges to install programs and perform administrative tasks. The first field is to write the name shown for this user. The computer's name is the host name you want for this new system. You can write whatever you want, but I suggest entering a relevant name. If this computer is used for a business, you probably already have a host name rule to use for your host name. We have the username to write. It is the login name to write for this user when you will log in. In my case, it will be the same as the name. Write the password you want, write it twice to confirm it. If you don't want to enter a password on every startup, you can select login automatically. In my case, I'm not a fan of this option, especially if I have professional stuff on my computer or if this computer is automatically connected to different online accounts, like my email. You can also choose if you want to encrypt your user's directory. So yes, I will check this option. This is an option I want. It will not encrypt the entire system partition, but only your user's directory, the directory that contains your data. So adjust according to your needs. And now the installation will continue. It might take some minutes to install. It's hard to say exactly how long it will take. It depends on several factors, including the speed of your hard drive. One thing I can tell you, it will be faster than installing Microsoft Windows. So I'll speed up the video during the installation and I'll get back once it's done. Alright, you will see this window once the installation is complete. We have two options. You can continue testing the live environment or you can restart now. That second option will reboot the computer and the newly installed Linux Mint system will boot. This second option is the one I will choose. Here, it asks me to remove the USB key to be sure the computer will not start the installation process again. Once done, press the Enter key. Earlier, we saw that my machine had Secure Boot enabled, and I mentioned that an additional step will be needed to use Extra Driver. So, this is where the Secure Boot configuration will take place. Choosing Enroll MDK will add the necessary signatures on your system for secure boot. In other words, it will add the necessary items to manage and be able to install additional drivers, even if the secure boot option is enabled. Choose Continue. Do I want to add the key? Yes. Enter the password you previously choose and entered for secure boot. The configuration will be done automatically. And there you go, it's already done. Click on Reboot to restart. Just a quick reminder, you won't have to do this step and it won't be proposed if Secure Boot is disabled in your system. As I mentioned earlier, because I also have Windows installed, we have a menu allowing us to choose which system we want to start. We can choose to start Linux Mint or Windows. By default, this menu will appear every time your machine starts. So, you can easily switch between Linux and Windows as you like. Before starting Linux, we'll just check that Windows still boots. And the answer is yes. I'll immediately restart to boot into Linux this time. On the login screen, we see the user I created earlier. It asks us to enter the user's password. And the user session will start. So that's all for the part 1 about install Linux. A second video will come, and it will be about what to do on after the installation, and I will present some things about the Linux Mint Cinnamon Edition interface. I hope this video was useful for you and you enjoy it. Please comment about your experience to install Linux, how it was the first time you install it. What is your recommendation to the new people wanted to install it? And I wish you a good day. Bye bye.